Can centuries-old traditions hold the answer to ending the wars of today? That is not merely a question for scholars or politicians. It is a cry rising from the dust of the Sahel, from the villages of Burkina Faso, from the hearts of a people long tested by conflict. My brothers, my sisters, pause with me here. The world is loud with guns and full of foreign soldiers, yet in the quiet voices of the elders there may lie the one path that armies have overlooked. In February of the year 2025, a young man, Captain Ibrahim Traore, rose before his nation and declared that peace would not be purchased with bullets. Instead, he turned his eyes back, far back, to the roots of his people. He reached for the voices of the chiefs, the custodians of dignity, the guardians of order, the ones who held courts long before parliaments and reconciled disputes long before presidents. In that single act, in that bold law which lifted up the authority of tradition, a new chapter was opened. I want you to picture it. The marketplace stilled, the village drums quiet, and into that silence comes the old wisdom, sanctioned now by the state, not hidden, not dismissed, but honored. It is as though the ancestors themselves were invited to sit once more at the table of governance. This story is not far away, not strange to us. For those of us who remember the wisdom of our grandmothers, the authority of church elders, the voices of community leaders in times of trial, this tale from West Africa strikes deep. It says the past is not dead. It still breathes. And if we listen, perhaps healing can be found not in the might of empires, but in the counsel of our roots. And so I invite you, yes, you who hear this voice, to join us on this journey. If you believe that the wisdom of our ancestors still matters in this century, then subscribe to this channel right now. Together we shall walk through history, through struggle, through triumph, and discover whether tradition itself can be the shield against chaos. In the month of February 2025, a law was passed in Burkina Faso that startled the old order. It was not written in the language of conquest, nor drafted with the backing of foreign advisors. It was something different, something radical in its simplicity. It said, the chiefs matter. The elders matter. The voices of the land are not relics, they are pillars. President Ibrahim Traore, young in age but old in vision, stood before his people and declared that this law was not a decoration, not a token. It was a foundation. He wanted it known that the soil of Burkina Faso would no longer be tilled only by politicians in the capital or generals in the barracks. It would be nurtured also by the custodians of memory, by the kings and chiefs who had carried order across generations. The law had three pillars, each one deliberate. The first, only those truly recognized by their people could claim the mantle of chief. No imposters, no pretenders, no opportunists. In a time when power is often seized by force or bought with money, this clause restored dignity. It returned the title to those whose authority was rooted not in wealth but in heritage, not in ambition but in consent. The second, chiefs were commanded to remain above political parties. Traore understood that once traditional leaders descend into party politics, their moral voice becomes a weapon, their neutrality lost. By keeping them independent, he was preserving something rare in a divided age, a voice that all could respect. The third, chiefs would not be salaried by the state. At first glance, it seemed harsh, but Traore believed this safeguard would preserve purity. For to be a chief, in his vision, was not to hold a job, but to bear a calling. It was not employment, but duty. Yes, there were murmurs of concern that some would struggle. Yet to many, this clause rang true. It cut the chains of corruption and re-anchored leadership in service. To understand the weight of this act, we must turn back the pages of history. Long before Europeans carved maps and drew borders, the land of the Mossi Empire flourished. The Mo Naba, emperor of the Mossi, presided over a kingdom with ministers, governors, and village delegates. It was order without constitutions, law without parliaments, strength without guns. It was the authority of respect, the power of consent. And though centuries have passed, that structure, that legitimacy, still breathes in villages where state officials rarely set foot. Across Burkina Faso, from the courtyards of the Mossi to the sacred groves of the Bobo, from the homesteads of the Lobi to the fields of the Gourmantche, chiefs remain mediators of land disputes, arbiters of family quarrels, keepers of peace in interethnic tensions. They are trusted where politicians divide. They are stable where governments falter. By passing this law, Traore was not inventing something new. He was uncovering something ancient, brushing the dust from a treasure that had been overlooked. He was saying to the world, we are not ashamed of our roots. We will not build peace by denying our elders. We will build peace by restoring them. And so in February 2025, the drums of law and the drums of tradition began to beat in rhythm. It was more than politics. It was reconciliation between the state and its soul. But, my brothers, my sisters, pause with me here. For when a young leader wields tradition as a weapon of peace, he invites both admiration and resistance. Laws can lift up voices, but they can also awaken powers long dormant. And as Traore signed his decree, the question echoed through the land. Was he building a shield of unity, or was he stirring forces that could yet reshape the nation's destiny? For as the law took root, eyes turned not only to the president, but to the chiefs themselves. How would they answer this call? Would they rise as guardians of unity, or would they falter under the weight of history? Not long after the law was passed, President Ibrahim Traore made a pilgrimage of respect. He went not to a foreign capital, not to the halls of Europe or America, but to the compound of the Monaba, the paramount ruler of the Mossi people. That meeting was more than ceremony. It was history-bending. For centuries, the Monaba had stood as the symbol of continuity, a voice that outlasted colonial conquest and political upheaval. By bowing his head before the Monaba, Traore was sending a message to his people. The modern state was not erasing tradition. It was embracing it. The news of this meeting rippled across the land. In Ouagadougou, in Bobo-Dioulasso, in villages tucked deep into the Sahel, the people spoke of it. They said the president was not just a soldier, he was a son returning to the elders. And in their hearts, hope stirred. Soon after, the government declared a new holiday, the Day of Tradition, to be celebrated each year on the 15th of May. That day, the streets of the capital filled not with soldiers, but with dancers. The drums of the Mossi, the songs of the Bobo, the chants of the Lobi, the prayers of the Gourmanche, all rose together in a symphony of unity. The Monaba himself praised the initiative, calling it a path of healing. From the west, the Bobo chiefs joined the celebration, calling for what they named a sacred alliance for peace. In the south, the Lobi organized prayers, declaring that peace was not merely the absence of war, but harmony with nature and ancestors. In the east, the Gourmanche promoted cultural education, urging the young to learn their languages and stories so that no extremist could rob them of identity. The movement spread like fire through dry grass. In the Central Plains, the Gurunsi leaders gathered their people, affirming support for the president's vision. In the markets of Manga, the Bisa formed a high council, traveling to the capital to pledge loyalty. In the lush lands of Banfora, the Senufo chiefs welcomed Traore, speaking of restoring dignity to those long overlooked. Each visit, each gesture, each embrace was another stone laid in the bridge of reconciliation. Even those who had been marginalized, the Fulani herders often accused of harboring extremists, were invited into the fold. Workshops were held to dismantle prejudice, to teach coexistence between herders and farmers. For the first time in years, conversations replaced accusations. Dignity replaced suspicion. And further north, the Tuareg, proud and nomadic, were not excluded. Traore's administration extended a hand, drawing them into dialogues of security and cross-border cooperation. No voice, however distant, was to be silenced. The crescendo of unity rose on the Day of Tradition. In towns and villages, people danced, people prayed, people declared, "We are one nation." It was no longer politics, it was spirit. The ancestors were invoked, and the youth were reminded that their strength was not in weapons, but in heritage. To those watching from afar, it seemed almost unbelievable. A nation long torn by terror, by suspicion, by ethnic division, was lifting itself not by foreign aid, but by ancestral wisdom. Hope was tangible. You could see it in the eyes of children learning ancient songs. You could hear it in the voices of chiefs speaking words of reconciliation. You could feel it in the silence of a people who, for a moment, believed that peace was within reach. But my friends, hope is a fragile thing. It burns bright, but the winds of conflict are strong. The soldiers still march, the extremists still whisper in the shadows. The scars of mistrust are not easily healed. So we must ask, was this wave of celebration the dawn of a new Burkina Faso, or merely a festival that would fade when the drums grew quiet? Could unity last beyond the dance of one day? When the echoes of the drums faded, what remained was not just memory but movement. The law was no longer a line on paper, it was becoming flesh in the villages, breath in the communities, power in the conversations under the trees. First came the cooling of anger. In places where disputes over land had once festered, chiefs stepped in to mediate. A quarrel between herders and farmers, once a spark for violence, was resolved not by police but by the trusted voice of a village elder. Where suspicion between ethnic groups had been thick, dialogue began to clear the air. Slowly, tentatively, reconciliation took root. Second, the tide of extremism began to weaken. Young men who had once looked to armed groups for purpose started to see another way. Instead of being drawn into promises of revenge, they were called into service of their communities. Traditional leaders organized cultural festivals, teaching history, telling stories, reviving dances. And the youth, hungry for identity, found belonging not in a gun but in a drumbeat, not in hatred but in heritage. There is the story of Isa, a boy from the east whose older brother had joined extremists. Isa himself had been tempted, but when his community celebrated the Day of Tradition, he stood among his people, heard the chants of his ancestors, and chose differently. He stayed. He became an apprentice to his chief, learning the lore of the land instead of the codes of terror. One life saved, one chain broken. Multiply that story by hundreds, and you begin to glimpse the power of this movement. Third, trust, once shattered, was being repaired. The Fulani herders, so often painted with suspicion, now found themselves invited into national dialogues. Workshops taught villagers and herders how to coexist. how to share pasture, how to walk together without fear. Suspicion did not vanish overnight, but doors that had long been shut were creaking open. Even in the north, where Tuareg communities had often felt forgotten, there was change. Through regional frameworks, their voices were brought into discussions of security and trade. They were no longer ghosts at the table. They were participants in shaping the nation's future. The consequences reached beyond security. Economically, communities began to rally around local projects. With chiefs leading, villages organized collective farms, repaired wells, rebuilt schools. These were not grand projects funded by international donors, but small acts of solidarity that strengthened the fabric of society. Spiritually, a shift was visible. Forgiveness, once a word heavy with pain, began to be spoken aloud. Chiefs preached it. Elders embodied it. Youth embraced it. Peace was no longer an abstract dream. It was becoming a lived practice. Yet, my brothers and sisters, let us not romanticize too quickly. Pain still lingers. Families still mourn sons lost to terror. Villages still carry scars of attacks. Suspicion is not erased in a season. Some chiefs struggled with the burden. Some communities doubted the sincerity of the state. And always the shadow of extremists remained, searching for weakness, waiting to exploit any division. But compared to the years of silence and fear, something undeniable had changed. The nation had begun to believe in itself again. It had begun to rediscover its voice, and in that rediscovery lay the seed of hope. So the question is this: can the wisdom of the elders truly keep the youth from falling into the arms of extremism? Can a drumbeat outlast a gunshot? Tell me, my friends, do you believe that the voices of tradition can still stand strong in the storms of our modern world? While the villages of Burkina Faso stirred with new life, the world beyond looked on with astonishment. For in an age when nations rush to buy weapons, when alliances are counted in missiles and drones, here was a country choosing a different path. It was as though a small voice had risen in a noisy world, and to everyone's surprise, it was being heard. International analysts struggled to name it. Was it politics? Was it culture? Was it strategy? They called it unusual, unconventional, even naive. But among ordinary people, something else was whispered. Global shock unseen before. Because who could have imagined that in the heart of the Sahel, long associated with poverty and instability, a leader would turn not outward but inward, finding strength in the wisdom of chiefs, in the counsel of tradition. For many outside observers, the law of February 2025 was a mirror held up to the world. It asked, what if the roots we ignored were the very keys to our survival? And to us here across the Atlantic, the echoes were unmistakable. Many of you listening today can recall the strength of church elders in the days of the civil rights movement. You remember how, when laws failed, when governments hesitated, it was the voices of the old, preachers, mothers, deacons, that steadied the march toward justice. You remember the front porches where disputes were settled, the neighborhood leaders who commanded respect without ever wearing a uniform. So when we look at Burkina Faso, we do not see something foreign. We see something familiar. We see a community remembering its elders. We see a people saying that dignity cannot be outsourced, that wisdom cannot be replaced by weapons. And in that vision, we hear an invitation to consider whether our own societies have lost something by silencing tradition. Governments in the West, especially in America, have poured billions into military campaigns abroad. Yet here, a young leader dares to suggest that healing comes not from drones, but from dialogue, not from contracts, but from culture. The world is puzzled. Some dismiss it, but others quietly are taking note. My brothers and sisters, history has a way of turning tables. What the powerful once mocked can become the very model that endures. And so we must ask, as this small nation rises on the wings of tradition, will the great powers of the earth allow it to fly? Or will they, threatened by its example, seek to drag it back into the old order? For if Burkina Faso can succeed, then the question will no longer be whether tradition matters, but whether the world itself is ready for a different kind of future. The story of Ibrahim Traore is not finished. It is only beginning. For laws may be written, festivals may be celebrated, but the true test lies in the years to come. The path ahead is both narrow and steep. Burkina Faso now stands at a crossroads. On one side lies the old road, endless cycles of violence, dependence on foreign aid, politics that divide rather than unite. On the other side lies a new way, fragile yet full of promise. A way where elders are honored, where communities take responsibility, where peace is not commanded from above but cultivated from within. Already the vision is spreading beyond the borders. Across the Sahel, stretching from Mali to Niger, from Chad to Senegal, the whispers are growing louder. Chiefs, kings, and elders are watching. They see that in Burkina Faso, tradition is no longer being sidelined, it is being restored. They see that a young president has dared to lift up voices once silenced, and many of them are responding. Kings across Sahel unite to Back Traore. That is not only a headline, it is a prophecy waiting to unfold. Imagine it. The Mo Naba of the Mossi, standing shoulder to shoulder with the kings of Mali, the chiefs of Niger, the elders of Chad. Imagine a Sahel not divided by colonial borders, but bound together by ancestral respect. Such unity could become a fortress stronger than any military alliance. And yet hope must walk hand in hand with caution. Enemies of peace will not remain idle. Extremists still prowl. External powers, seeing their influence threatened, may seek to undermine this experiment. Even within Burkina Faso, there will be those tempted to twist tradition for personal gain. The challenge ahead is immense. But hear me now, the seed has been planted. And when a seed is planted in soil watered by faith, nurtured by history, and shielded by community, it has the power to grow into a tree that cannot be cut down. The coming years will determine whether Burkina Faso becomes a beacon or a cautionary tale. Will it rise as a testimony that peace can be built on heritage? Or will it falter under pressure from within and without? As the sun sets on the first chapter of Traore's leadership, the world waits to see. Will this small nation become the light of the Sahel? Or will the shadows of old conflicts return to dim its flame? And so we arrive at the end of this journey, not with despair, but with a vision. In Burkina Faso, a young leader has dared to remember what the world has forgotten. That peace is not carved by weapons, but by wisdom, not secured by foreign powers, but by the guardians of community. We have walked through history together. We have seen the Mo Naba of the Mossi, the chiefs of the Bobo, the voices of the Lobi and the Gourmanche, rising again with dignity. We have watched herders and farmers find common ground, and the youth discover identity in drums rather than rifles. What began as a law in February 2025 has become a movement of the spirit. But let us not pretend the road ahead is easy. Burkina Faso stands under watchful eyes, some cheering, others waiting for failure. For the great powers of the world, this is a global shock unseen before. How can a nation so small, so often dismissed, suddenly present a model that challenges centuries of thinking? And yet the vision grows. It is no longer confined to one country. Kings across Sahel unite to Back Traore. That is the cry echoing across the deserts, the forests, the rivers. If the chiefs of Mali, Niger, Chad, and beyond join hands with their Burkinabe brothers, then the Sahel could rise not as a region of sorrow, but as a region of strength. Kings across Sahel unite to Back Traore. This is not just news, it is a call, a prophecy, perhaps even a destiny. Now, my brothers and sisters, I turn to you. What lesson does this story hold for us here, far across the ocean? Perhaps it reminds us that we too must remember the voices of our elders, the power of our traditions, the dignity of our roots. For no matter the century, no matter the continent, true peace is always born from respect, from unity, from the courage to honor what others have thrown away. And so I invite you now, if this story touched your spirit, if you believe that wisdom still matters in the 21st century, leave a comment below. Tell us, could this model of peace work in America, in Africa, in the world? And do not forget, subscribe to this channel, because every new voice that joins us is another spark of hope, another flame to keep the vision alive. Together we are not just watching history, we are helping to write it.